Ever get the feeling that people just get away with things these days?
Yeah.
Like maybe there should be, I don't know, some kind of ultimate accountability, some
Hmm.
force that ensures consequences for bad behavior.
Oh, yeah. It's a timeless desire, isn't it? That longing for justice,
Yeah. Yeah.
balance in the universe. And the ancient Greeks actually had a concept for that, the
The
Furies.
Furies,
Mhm.
like a really bad hair
A
day.
little more intense than that.
Okay.
We're talking ancient goddesses of vengeance, often depicted as three relentless sisters who pursued those who committed heinous crimes, especially within families.
Okay, so three sisters
Right.
out for vengeance already sounds like a Greek tragedy waiting to happen.
Yeah.
So where do we even begin to unpack this?
Well, we've got some fascinating insights from Natalie Haynes, author of Divine Might, Goddesses in Greek Myth, to guide us.
Okay.
She's really helped me understand the Furies in a whole new light.
Awesome. I'm all ears. Let's dive in.
Mm.
First things first. Who exactly were these Furies? Aside from, ultimate bad family karma.
They were believed to be the daughters of either Uranus, the sky god, or Nyx, the primordial goddess of night,
Okay.
depending on which source you consult. But regardless of their parentage, they represented that primal force of vengeance, almost like a cosmic check and balance against wrongdoing.
So they weren't just these shadowy figures lurking in the background.
Right.
They were actual goddesses with a specific role to play in the Greek cosmos.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that the ancient Greeks didn't have the same language for internal psychology that we do.
Right.
Emotions, even powerful ones like vengeance, were often seen as external forces acting upon people.
So instead of saying, I'm furious,
Yeah.
a Greek person might say, the Furies are at my door.
Precisely. The Furies weren't just a metaphor. They embodied this very real force that the Greeks believed could influence their actions and even drive them to madness.
Gotcha. Okay, that's starting to make sense. So how does this all connect to our own ideas about justice and consequences?
Mm-hmm.
Do the Furies represent something that we still grapple with today?
That's what's so fascinating.
Yeah.
Even though we might not believe in literal goddesses of vengeance anymore, the Furies tap into a very human need for accountability.
Okay.
That deep-seated desire for wrongdoing to be acknowledged, for the scales to be balanced, even if it takes a while.
So like karma, what goes around comes around.
Exactly. Think about how often you hear those phrases or how satisfying it feels when someone who did something terrible finally faces consequences.
Uh-huh.
Even years later, it's like this echo of that ancient belief in a force that ensures justice, even if it's delayed.
Yeah, I could definitely relate to that. But were the Furies always about, bringing down the hammer of justice? Natalie Haynes mentioned that they weren't always about driving people to suicide.
Right.
What does she mean by that?
That's one of the things I found so insightful about Haynes's perspective.
Yeah.
She points out that the Furies also acted as a deterrent, almost like societal pressure to behave ethically. It wasn't just about punishing the guilty, it was about preventing wrongdoing in the first place.
So like a cosmic warning system.
Right.
Don't mess up, or the Furies will get you.
Exactly. Haynes gives the example of Telemachus in Homer's Odyssey.
Uh-huh.
He hesitates to kick out his mother, even though she's causing him all sorts of problems, because he fears incurring the Furies' wrath. It's like this primal fear of consequence is woven into the fabric of their society.
Wow. Talk about a motivator for good behavior.
Oh.
But to be honest, sometimes it feels like we've lost that sense of accountability in our own world.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so hit me with the drama.
Okay.
Who was Orestes, and what did he do to attract the attention of these fearsome goddesses?
Arezestes was the son of Agamemnon, the leader of the Greek forces in the Trojan War.
Okay.
Now, when Agamemnon returned home after 10 years of war, he was murdered by his wife, Clytemnestra.
Wow. Talk about a homecoming gone wrong.
Yeah.
So did the Furies go after Clytemnestra?
Yeah.
I mean, murder is pretty high on the list of, well, things that will get you a visit from the goddesses of vengeance.
You'd think so, right? But it gets even more complicated.
Right.
Clytemnestra killed Agamemnon because he had sacrificed their daughter, Iphigenia, before the war to appease the gods and ensure favorable winds for the fleet.
So it was like a revenge killing. She was
Yeah.
still furious about her daughter's death.
Exactly. It's a classic example of that cyclical nature of vengeance, how one act of violence begets another. But here's where the Furies come in. They end up pursuing Orestes because he chooses to avenge his father by killing his own mother.
Wait, so he kills his mother to avenge his father who killed his sister.
Yeah.
This family needs some serious therapy.
Mm.
But I'm guessing therapy wasn't really an option back in ancient Greece.
Not exactly.
Okay.
And this is where the Furies take center stage.
Oh.
Orestes is caught in an impossible situation. Damned if he does, damned if he doesn't. He's obligated to avenge his father. But doing so, by killing his mother, brings down the full wrath of the Furies. His trial in Athens, with the goddess Athena presiding, becomes this epic showdown between ancient laws and evolving social values.
Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting. So what happens?
Right.
Does Orestes get a free pass because he's avenging his father? Or do the Furies win out?
Well, that's a story for our next segment.
Oh, come on.
But what I find so compelling about this myth is that it highlights the complexities of justice and vengeance.
Okay.
It's not always a clear-cut black and white situation.
And I'm guessing this is where Natalie Haynes's insights come into play.
Exactly.
She mentioned something about the moral simplicity of the Furies, contrasting it with our modern world of nuance and justifications.
She finds a certain appeal in the way the Furies represent this unyielding force of consequence. In their world, actions have clear repercussions, even if those repercussions aren't always fair or proportionate by today's standards.
Right. It's like they cut through all the noise and get straight to the heart of the matter. Did you do wrong? Then face the consequences.
Right.
No excuses.
No loopholes.
No loopholes.
Yeah.
It's a very different way of looking at justice than we're used to. But it certainly raises some thought-provoking questions about our own approach to accountability.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
And I'm dying to hear more about Natalie Haynes's perspective on the Furies,
Yeah.
especially those vase paintings she mentioned.
Yes.
But I think we need to take a breath here and come back to this after a quick break. Stay with us, folks. The Furies are just getting warmed up. All right, we're back and ready to delve deeper into the fascinating world of the Furies. Before the break, we were talking about this idea of moral simplicity. How the Furies represent a world where actions have clear and often immediate consequences.
It's a concept that's both alluring and terrifying, isn't it?
Yeah. This idea that there's a force out there ensuring that we can't escape the repercussions of our choices.
It definitely makes you think twice about those little white lies, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
But I'm curious, you mentioned earlier that the crimes that attracted the Furies' attention varied across different myths. Sometimes it seemed extreme by today's standards.
That's a great observation.
Yeah.
And it highlights the fact that the concept of what constitutes a heinous crime has evolved over time.
Right.
What might have sent the Furies into a vengeful frenzy in ancient Greece might not even warrant a raised eyebrow today.
Okay, I need an example. What kind of crime would have been a Fury-worthy offense back then that wouldn't even register on our moral radar now?
Well, we talked about Phoenix earlier, who was cursed with childlessness for even considering sleeping with his father's concubine at his mother's urging.
Right.
That's a situation that would likely raise eyebrows today, but it wouldn't necessarily be seen as a crime worthy of divine retribution.
Yeah, that's a great point. It really shows how cultural norms and ideas about morality shift over time.
Right.
But it also makes you wonder if we've swung too far in the other direction. I mean, do we let people off the hook too easily these days?
That's a question worth pondering.
Yeah.
Have we lost sight of the importance of consequences, of taking responsibility for our actions? The Furies, in their own stark way, represent that primal need for balance, for a sense that the universe ultimately corrects itself.
It's like they embody that voice in the back of our minds that whispers, you might get away with it now, but eventually you'll have to pay the piper.
Precisely. And that brings us back to the case of Orestes. We left off with him facing trial in Athens for killing his mother to avenge his father.
Right. Talk about a moral dilemma.
Yeah.
So how does this epic showdown between Orestes and the Furies play out?
Well, the trial itself is a fascinating exploration of justice, revenge, and the shifting values of Athenian society.
Okay.
Orestes argues that he was obligated to avenge his father, even though it meant killing his mother. The Furies, of course, demand their due, arguing that matricide is an unforgivable crime.
So, like the ultimate legal battle. Tradition versus progress. Vengeance versus mercy. Who ends up winning? Do the Furies get their way?
The verdict ultimately comes down to Athena, the goddess of wisdom who presides over the trial. And in a groundbreaking decision, she casts the deciding vote in favor of Orestes, acquitting him of the crime.
Whoa, hold on. So Athena sides with Orestes. That's surprising. I thought the Furies were like the ultimate force of justice in Greek mythology. How could they lose?
It's a pivotal moment in the story.
Yeah.
And it speaks to the evolving understanding of justice in Athenian society.
Okay.
Athena acknowledges the Furies' role in upholding the law, but she also recognizes the complexities of Orestes' situation.
Right.
She argues that vengeance, while important, cannot be allowed to reign unchecked.
So it's not a complete victory for Orestes. I mean, he still killed his mother.
Right.
Does he just walk away scot-free?
Not quite. While he's acquitted of the crime, he's still pursued by the Furies for a time. They don't just disappear.
They must have been furious. No pun intended.
Right.
So what happens? How does Orestes finally escape their wrath?
He eventually finds refuge at the temple of Apollo, who had encouraged him to avenge his father in the first place. And through a series of rituals and interventions by various gods, he's finally cleansed of his guilt, and the Furies are appeased.
Okay, so it wasn't just a courtroom drama. It was a whole divine intervention situation.
Exactly.
Okay.
The story highlights the fact that even in the face of seemingly unyielding forces like the Furies, there's always room for nuance, for compassion, and for the possibility of redemption.
That's actually quite comforting in a way.
Yeah.
It's like saying, even when we make mistakes, even when we do terrible things, there's still hope for forgiveness, for finding peace.
And perhaps that's one of the most enduring lessons of this ancient myth.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that justice, while necessary, doesn't always have to be harsh or unforgiving. It can be tempered with mercy, with understanding, and with the possibility of growth.
That's a beautiful thought. But before we get too carried away with the warm fuzzies, let's bring it back to those captivating vase paintings Natalie Haynes mentioned. She seemed particularly drawn to how the Furies were portrayed visually. What was it about those images that resonated with her so much?
Well, Haynes challenges the typical description of the Furies as disgusting or monstrous,
Right.
which is how they're often portrayed in some texts.
Okay.
Instead, she points to the visual depictions in vase paintings, where they often appear young, fierce, and exhausted.
Exhausted. That's not the first word that comes to mind when I think of vengeful goddesses. Why? Exhausted.
Haynes suggests that it's because they're constantly pursuing justice,
Oh, where?
relentlessly upholding cosmic balance. It's a tiring job. And she finds something relatable in that image. This idea that even powerful deities experience fatigue, frustration, even a sense of weariness.
That's fascinating. It makes them seem almost human, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like they're not these untouchable, otherworldly beings, but rather forces that are intimately connected to our own experiences.
Exactly. And Haynes also loves how they're often depicted leaning on each other, almost sisterly. Despite their fearsome reputation, it adds another layer of complexity to their character, reminding us that even the most formidable forces can be vulnerable, can seek comfort and support from each other.
It's like they're saying, yeah, upholding cosmic justice is tough work, but at least we have each other. It humanizes them in a way I never would have imagined.
It's a powerful reminder that even deities aren't immune to the complexities of relationships, to the need for connection and support.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation.
Yeah.
I feel like I have a whole new understanding of the Furies, not just as these fearsome goddesses of vengeance, but as complex figures who represent our own deepest longings for justice, balance, and accountability.
I agree. It's been a fascinating exploration of how these ancient myths continue to resonate with us today, prompting us to examine our own beliefs about right and wrong, about consequence and redemption.
And speaking of modern-day parallels, I can't help but think about how we see echoes of the Furies in our own world, particularly in the age of social media.
Oh, absolutely. The way we call out injustice, demand accountability, even engage in online shaming. These are all, in a sense, modern manifestations of that primal desire for balance, for a sense that wrongdoing will be addressed.
It's like we've created our own digital Furies. But the question is, are these new avenues for justice ultimately serving us well? Or are we simply perpetuating cycles of anger and retribution without actually achieving any real resolution?
That's a crucial question, and one that we'll delve into further in our final segment. But for now, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've learned about the Furies. These complex and compelling figures who challenge us to confront the darker aspects of human nature and strive for a more just and balanced world.
I'm definitely still processing all of this. It's a lot to unpack. But I'm eager to hear your thoughts on how these ancient myths connect to our modern struggles with justice and accountability. We'll be back after a short break to wrap up our deep dive into the world of the Furies. Don't go anywhere. We're back, and, I have to say, this deep dive into the world of the Furies has been a wild ride.
It has.
I feel like I've learned so much about ancient Greece, about mythology, and even about human nature itself.
It's amazing how these ancient stories can still feel so relevant, isn't it? They tap into these timeless questions about justice and vengeance,
Yeah,
the complexities of right and wrong.
absolutely. Before the break, we were talking about how we see echoes of the Furies in our modern worlds, especially with social media
Mm.
and the way we call out injustice online.
Yeah, it's fascinating how technology has given us these new avenues for seeking justice,
Right.
for holding people accountable.
Yeah,
But as we were discussing, it also raises some serious ethical dilemmas.
right. Like, are we really achieving justice through online shaming? Or are we just creating a digital mob mentality that can be just as destructive as the vengeance the Furies embodied?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah,
And I think the story of the Furies can offer some valuable insights. Remember how Athena ultimately intervened in Orestes' trial,
right.
advocating for a more nuanced approach to justice?
Right.
It's a reminder that even in the face of outrage, even when we're convinced someone deserves punishment, we need to proceed with caution and wisdom.
So it's not just about blindly seeking retribution. We need to consider the bigger picture, the potential consequences of our actions,
Yeah.
even when we feel morally justified.
Exactly. And that's where things get tricky in the age of social media. It's so easy to get caught up in the outrage, to feel like we need to take a stand,
Yeah.
to punish the wrongdoer. But we need to remember that the court of public opinion doesn't always operate with fairness or due process.
Right. It's like we've become our own digital Furies, casting judgment and demanding swift retribution without always considering the complexities of the situation.
And that's where I think Natalie Haynes's perspective on the moral simplicity of the Furies is so insightful.
Hmm.
She's not advocating for a return to a world of harsh, unforgiving justice. Instead, she's highlighting the need for a balance between accountability and compassion,
Okay.
between acknowledging wrongdoing and recognizing the potential for redemption.
It's like she's saying, yes, consequences are important, but let's not let our desire for justice turn into a thirst for vengeance.
Exactly. It's a message that resonates deeply in our current climate. We need to find a way to hold people accountable for their actions without losing sight of our shared humanity.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of the Furies,
Mm,
what are some key takeaways for our listeners?
yeah.
What can we learn from these ancient goddesses of vengeance that can help us navigate the complexities of justice in our own lives?
Well, I think the first takeaway is that the desire for justice is deeply ingrained in human nature.
Mm-hmm.
We crave balance, we long for fairness, and we instinctively react when we perceive that those things are out of whack.
Right. It's like that primal need for the universe to right itself, right? For
Mhm.
wrongdoers to face consequences, for the scales to be balanced.
Precisely. And the Furies, despite their fearsome reputation, represent that very real human longing.
Yeah.
They remind us that even in the absence of human laws or social structures, there's this deep-seated belief in a force that ensures accountability.
But as we've discussed, it's not just about blindly seeking revenge or punishment.
Right.
There needs to be a balance.
Absolutely. And I think that's the second key takeaway. Justice, like vengeance, can be a double-edged sword.
Okay.
While it's important to hold people accountable for their actions, we need to proceed with wisdom,
Mhm.
with compassion, and with a deep understanding of the complexities of human experience.
It's like that saying, an eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind. We can't let our desire for justice turn into a cycle of pain and retribution.
Exactly. And that's where I think the Furies offer a final and perhaps most profound lesson. They challenge us to look inward, to confront the darker aspects of our own nature, and to ask ourselves, are we seeking true justice, or are we simply satisfying our own thirst for vengeance?
It's a powerful question that we should all ask ourselves, especially in this age of instant judgment and online outrage. We need to be mindful of our own motives to ensure that our pursuit of justice doesn't become a form of vengeance itself.
Well said. It's a delicate balance, but I think the Furies, in all their complexity and contradictions, can serve as valuable guides as we navigate these challenging ethical dilemmas.
This has been such an insightful exploration of the Furies. I feel like I've gained a whole new appreciation for these ancient goddesses and the timeless lessons they offer.
It's been a pleasure delving into these ideas with you, and I hope our listeners have found this deep dive as engaging and thought-provoking as we have.
Oh, I'm sure they have. And speaking of our listeners, I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder. We've talked about the Furies as these ancient goddesses of vengeance, but what if we reframe our understanding of them? What if, instead of representing punishment, they symbolize something else? What if they represent the enduring power of conscience, that inner voice that calls us to account, that reminds us of the consequences of our actions, and urges us toward a more just and compassionate world.
That's a beautiful and insightful way to reframe their role.
Yeah.
Perhaps the Furies, rather than simply punishing wrongdoing, are also guiding us toward a higher moral understanding.
It's certainly something to think about. And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder this idea further. A huge thank you to Natalie Haynes for her insightful commentary on the Furies, and to all of you for joining us on this deep dive.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep seeking those nuggets of wisdom that help us understand ourselves and the world around us a little bit better.
And as always, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on our next deep dive.